Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all the ships at sea. I think you are like me and keenly aware of the newest puppet of the Democrats have installed as their favorite for the 2024 U.S. presidential election, one Kamala Debbie Harris. Yes, installed. She was not elected in the primaries, much like how they also installed Hillary Rodham in 2016, even though Bernie Sanders rightfully won the primary Democratic election. Seems to be a pattern of the Democratic Party using highly undemocratic practices in their choosing of candidates for general elections lately. What do we really know about her? Not much, but you're about to learn some more. Born to foreign university students in Oakland, California in 1964, essentially an anchor baby, and in the heat of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement. Both of her parents, in fact, were drawn to the University of California, Berkeley because of its liberal progressive reputation. This begs another question that you do not hear brought up by mainstream media. Did the U.S. Founding Fathers intend for someone with non-citizen parents to be eligible for the office of President of the United States? Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5 of the Constitution states, "No person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States." But I do believe it is worthwhile for us to look at the heart of that clause. The founders did not want foreign interests controlling this nation. Tell me, as a person who is an anchor baby for two non-citizen parents, the best qualified for the role, or perhaps more leaning to the thinking of his or her parents who may or may not have had the best interest of their country's origin in mind. We just went through a similar situation, though not identical, with Barack Hussein Obama, since his mother was a natural-born U.S. citizen, but his father was a Kenyan national, and Obama himself was also a Kenyan national. This was a huge mistake and led us down a dangerous pathway as a nation, but I digress. Kamala's Jamaican father Donald and Indian mother Shyamala divorced in 1971, and she and her sister were thereafter mainly raised by the mother, even migrating to that great leftist hotbed Canada for a stint. Named for a lotus flower during the age of the West Coast flower power movement, Kamala most certainly took her liberal progressive upbringing and ran with it. It is with these roots set squarely in the heart of the U.S. Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s that we must try to understand Kamala, or at least what makes her tick. BLM? Yep. In her mindset, darker-skinned people have always been and always will be downtrodden, kicked around, and otherwise spat upon by Americans of European ancestry, despite any notion or ideology to the contrary. Raised around the Black Panthers movement in the 1960s, she most certainly gets it honest, if nothing else. Remember the race riots of 2020, exploding especially after the death of George Floyd. Minneapolis burning. Kamala immediately took the side of violent rioters and looters and in fact backed defund the police movements popular at that time and offered to bail out arrested rioters, following through for many violent offenders. Since revealed that George Floyd was under the influence of drugs at the time of his death and that Derek Chauvin merely used policing tactics to restrain Floyd taught to him in his training regimen, it now appears that race of riots were largely unfounded and overblown by people like Kamala Harris in their bids to make America look like a haven for racists. So fast forward to the summer of 2020, and Joe Biden named her as his vice presidential candidate, largely on her reputation as an ultra-liberal progressive senator from California, and on her ethnicity and gender, plain and simple. So, my fellow Americans, I ask if skin color and gender should be the main qualifications for our next president. Have we come to a place in the great history of this nation that we now place the future squarely in a candidate's hand only on the criteria of skin color and gender? Lord help us. Of much greater concern yet is the recent selection of Mrs. Harris' candidate for vice president on her political ticket, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, a man who also sat idly by and watched Minneapolis burn during the summer of 2020, all while lauding the terrorists or rioters. So let's take a bit to consider this, kids. We are right now in 2024 looking at the very real prospect of either voting for an imagined insurrectionist or voting for a real insurrectionist. Got that? One Mr. Donald Trump never even hinted at insurrection, but is constantly chided by leftist lamestream media as having done exactly that in January of 2021. In fact, many innocent Americans are currently being held as political hostages in U.S. federal institutions for no reason whatsoever. But that is a topic for another video altogether. And as stated, one Mrs. Kamala Harris and her VP candidate, Mr. Tim Walz for that matter, led an insurrection which led to American deaths and personal property destroyed, yet no one in the powers that be has done one GD thing to get them for it. Named as Joe Biden's quote-unquote border czar early in his illicit regime, Kamala never even got close to the U.S.-Mexico border to see the true plight of the people living along that stretch. In fact, it would be more than fair to ask exactly what Kamala has accomplished as vice president. Whenever asked substantive questions by actual journalists, she has repeatedly spewed nonsensical word salads. Other times, she is best known for her over-the-top laughing sessions reminiscent of the Wicked Witch of the West and the Wizard of Oz. Having begun her career in politics as district attorney for San Francisco, California district, Kamala used her liberal thinking to try to reform the role. Staunchly against the death penalty, she was quickly at odds with the San Francisco Police Department when a fellow officer was murdered. Later elected to the California Attorney General position and then to the U.S. Senate, Kamala went full-on leftist, advocating for everything from legalized weed to open borders to states forced to pay transgender surgeries for convicts. You name the atrocity, Kamala was fully backing it. Having been Felon Joe's partner in crimes for the past 3.5 years, Kamala secretly pulled strings behind the scenes for all the woke causes, BLM, Antifa, you name it. Today, my loyal viewers, this puppet asks honest questions and needs honest answers. Can the United States of America afford another 4 years of what we have just been through, or maybe even further to the left? Can we afford more out-of-control inflation, massive waves of destitute immigrants flooding in unrestricted, stricter gun laws, or more and more race riots fed by the leftist in chief, all while Whitey gets full blame for everything under the sun? She most certainly would never represent the ethnic majority of Americans from what we have seen. I don't know about you, but this madness has to stop, and it has to stop now. Good night, and sleep well.